We are recording the interview of Gary Craig. This interview is being conducted by Erica Carter from the Wright State University's Veterans Voices Project. Also in attendance are Bruce LaForce. This interview is being recorded at the Holiday Inn, located at 2800 Presidential Drive in Fairborn, Ohio. It is 3:21 p.m. on May 29th, 2019. Thank you so much for coming out today.
Thank you for having me.
Yes, sir. Where and when were you born?
Seattle, Washington, in September 25th, 1939.
1939. Who were your parents and what were their occupations?
Well, my father was Earl Craig, and my mother was Irene McLynn Craig, and my dad had been in the Navy in World War II, and my mother was a homemaker, and my dad later became a mechanic for the Seattle bus system.
Okay. Do you know what your dad did in World War II?
Yeah, he was prior to going into World War II, he enlisted when he was 17 and was on the last coal-burning cruiser in the United States Navy. You may not have heard of this movie called Sand Pebbles, but it was a very famous movie. You've heard of it, yeah. Very famous movie with Steve McQueen, and my father was essentially Steve McQueen. He shoveled coal on the coal-burning cruiser, and he went up the Yangtze River in 1928, which was the same year that the movie Sand Pebbles was filmed. It was a gunboat, coal burning went up there, and so my dad told me a lot of stories. Unfortunately, he passed away before the movie came out, but I recall a lot of things that he said about that. So then he got back from World War II. Well, I'm sorry, that was earlier on, and he got out of the Navy, and then when World War II came along, he re-enlisted and went on a destroyer escort in the North Atlantic. At the time, the German submarines were really taking out a lot of American shipping to Europe, and so his job was to try to destroy the German submarines.
Wow.
Yeah, so anyway, I grew up knowing all that, and so I went to the University of Washington and studied, graduated in engineering and ROTC, Air Force, and then got my commission and went off to flying school and in 1962, and it was took me 5 years to get through because I had a tremendous thirst for knowledge. Anyway, so my first assignment was Yokota, Japan, in a KB-50, which most people don't know what that is, but it's essentially a later version of a B-29, and a lot of people know what the B-29 was in World War II. So it was a four-engine, propeller-driven bomber that they had converted to a tanker. So the bomb bays were converted to fuel tanks, and then they added 2 jet engines to it. So we had 6 engines total. And we needed that to refuel jet fighters because they go real fast and we go real slow, and so we needed to go as fast as we could possibly go to keep them in the sky, because if they go too slow, they stall out. And so anyway, that was my first assignment, was at Yokota, Japan, and went there in 1963, and a few months later, we, in August of '64, I got an alert, which they would test our time frame to get to the base and have all of our equipment with us and so forth. So there was an alert, and I told my wife, I'd gotten married just out of college, and I told my wife, I said, I have to go check in on the alert, but I'll be over at the club in about an hour. I just have to check in. And so I got to the briefing, and they said, this is not a drill. We're going to war. And I said, where? And they said, Vietnam. And I said, where is that? And they said, you're leaving right now to go there. And of course, we had no cell phones or anything. So she wound up sitting over at the club for 3 hours waiting for me, and I didn't show up. And so we had taken off straight to Vietnam.
Can I? Okay, we have just missed so much.
Okay.
You did a lot of woo. So let's find out just a little bit more about you and how you became the lieutenant colonel, correct?
Yes.
That you are now. So just jumping back, your dad was this amazing World War II veteran.
Correct.
Navy veteran.
Yes.
But you didn't choose the Navy. You chose the Air Force. Why?
Well, I wanted to fly, and of course I realized that there was Navy aviation as well, but I just decided on the Air Force for some reason. I guess probably not much thought went into it.
Now, did you have any other siblings?
My sister was several years younger, and she passed away of pneumonia the day I started college.
I'm so sorry.
And then a couple months later, my father died of a heart attack. And so my mother was left alone at that time. So I spent most of the time, I stayed at home and went to college and lived there. But I did live in my fraternity for some of that time.
How far was school from home?
It was about half an hour drive.
Okay, so not too far.
Yeah.
And was college very important to your parents? Was that something that they pushed, or was that just important to you?
No, I think it was important to them as well. My father had an 8th grade education, which was not uncommon in those days. My mother did graduate from high school, and I graduated from the same high school that she graduated from. And but I guess it was just, it's not something we talked a lot about, but I just assumed that that's what I would do. I was pretty good at grades and math, and so that's why. And I graduated from high school in 1957, and that was the year of the Sputnik in Russia. And at the time, people and the President of the United States were saying, we need engineers because we need to beat the Russians. And so a lot of us went into engineering. A lot of them dropped out. I stayed in and graduated in engineering, but it was a big deal to try to, help the United States beat the Russians. Yeah.
What were your grades like? Were you a pretty decent student?
Yeah, I was a honor society. I mean, I wasn't the top or anything like that, but good enough. And at that time, when I went to the University of Washington, you could get into the University of Washington with a 1.8 grade point.
Wow.
That's what it was like. And the tuition was $50 a quarter. $50 a quarter.
You can't buy paper for $50 a
Yeah,
quarter these days.
Yeah. So it was pretty easy to do.
Okay. Were there scholarships and things like that back then?
Yeah, they had them. I never got one. I didn't apply for any. I was on the swimming team, and the swimming team did not offer scholarships, but I had always swam competitively growing up, and so that's what I did.
Any other interests?
No, I guess just between being on the swimming team, being in ROTC, and being in engineering, and being in a fraternity, that took up all my time.
And that was in college?
Yes.
Okay. What fraternity were you in?
Fiji Phi Gamma Delta.
Is that still around today?
Oh yeah, very, very active.
All right.
And I was active when I came back in fraternity as well.
All right, wonderful, wonderful. Okay, so you said you got married after college.
Yep, right after, I guess it was, graduated in June, got married in July.
Did you meet her in college?
Yeah, I met her in, I think my sophomore year, and we got to know each other, and
What was she studying?
she studied art, and later became quite a good artist.
Okay.
So it's fun. I still have. She passed away about 10 years ago, but I still have a lot of her art.
Okay. It's nice when you can hold on to something
Yeah.
that's so valuable
Yeah.
and important. So my next question would be, you did ROTC in college. Did they help pay for your college?
Yeah, actually, we in my senior year, they paid. It wasn't a lot, but it was better than nothing. Like I say, the tuition was pretty cheap too.
What did ROTC look like back then in comparison for people that do it now? I would just like, can you tell me, do you remember any of that, what it was like?
I don't know what it's like now, so I can't compare, but yeah, I enjoyed it. I became the president of a national military honorary called Scabbard and Blade, and so I was involved from that standpoint as well.
Okay, you just tried to skip
Yeah.
over all this,
Yeah,
this
well, I didn't know it was
wonderfulness.
going to include all this.
Yeah, we want to know about you.
Yeah, okay.
About how you got to be where you are, because some of these skills probably helped you in your military career.
I'm sure it did.
Yeah, okay. We're going to figure out just what it was
All
as we
right.
go along here, hopefully. Okay, so you graduated from college, you married this wonderful sweetheart of yours, and you went to your first, I want to call it basic training, but that's not what it was. You guys do
Flight school, I guess.
flight school.
Yeah.
And were you able to take your wife with you, or?
Oh, sure. Yeah.
Okay. And
Yeah.
where was flight school located?
Waco, Texas.
I've been there.
Yeah.
Okay. How long was flight school?
Well, about a year.
Oh, okay. And was it difficult or easy or?
No, it was. I didn't find it that difficult.
Did the engineering skills help?
Well, I think so. Yeah, I think that made quite a difference.
Did you have any buddies that you made then?
I did. I knew one of my fraternity brothers was down there, not in my class, but at the same time. And then I met a number of other friends that I still have to this day.
Wonderful. Did you end up serving with any of them?
No,
No.
I didn't serve with them, but I met a lot of great folks that
Okay, we'll talk about that
along the line. Yeah.
when we come to them.
Yeah.
Okay, so flight school was a year. You lived in Waco, Texas, and then after that you moved to
Yokota, Japan.
Yokota, Japan, and that was in 1963.
Correct.
Okay, and there was no conflict yet, right? War had not happened.
That's
It was
correct.
so you joined because it was who you wanted to be. You wanted to fly. You were proud of the country. Your dad had instilled that into you, and yeah.
Yeah,
And you were seeing the world.
sure.
And so that was lovely.
Yeah.
Okay. How is your wife feeling about all this moving around?
Well, she was the one that actually suggested, you choose your assignments out of school. And there were only 2 assignments to Japan. And she said, why don't we take one? And I kind of was shocked that she said that, but I said, yeah, let's do it.
Now, you lived in Seattle, and a lot of our listeners here are from Dayton. So I'm from California myself, so I know what it's like to live on the West Coast. So was living in Japan a huge culture shock for you, or was it just like, this is tomorrow?
No, it was, obviously it was different, and we're talking about a lot of years ago. And so it was still somewhat primitive at the time. And so it was obviously different. The climate and everything is about the same. And
Did they treat you well?
oh yeah, yeah. No, the Japanese were wonderful people. I really enjoyed. My wife actually went on television. She knew someone that had some contacts in Tokyo, and so she became a teacher of English, conversational English on television in Tokyo at the time, and which was good because I was gone most of the time. And so after she was on for a while, the premier of Japan saw her, and he said, I would like her to teach my children English. And so she would go to the premier's home and teach his children English. And she oftentimes would have dinner with them and then stay overnight. And in 1964, the Olympic Games were held in Tokyo. And I had wanted to attend the games, and so I had acquired a lot of tickets to various events. And then the war started about a week before the Olympic Games, and so I didn't get a chance to go to any of them. But she sat in the premier's seat watching the Olympic Games, so it was a pretty slick deal for her.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. Okay. So we're caught up now to the point where you say, go to the club, and I assume you mean the officers' club. I'll be back in a little while, honey.
Right.
You find out this is not a drill.
Yeah.
We are not playing.
Yeah.
It is time to go.
Exactly.
Okay. Where do you go? Oh,
How did you didn't really say how you got hooked on being a pilot, excuse me, and then what kind of a pilot, when you started flight school, did you want to be a fighter pilot, any kind of pilot, bomber pilot?
Yeah,
Did they sort that
I
out?
didn't really have a lot of, thoughts about, except the airline. A lot of guys were going into the airlines at the time. I didn't really have any particular thoughts about whether I was going to stay in for 30 years or get out or whatever. So I didn't really have. But a lot of the guys deliberately went into multi-engine because they wanted to fly for the airlines afterwards.
okay.
But
So you're like, as long as it's a plane, it's for me.
yeah, there you go.
If it's a plane, it's for me. Okay. So what happens after that briefing? Can you kind of guide me step by step?
Yeah, we just had the briefing and literally jumped into our airplanes and flew to Saigon that very minute.
Gear, it was just all like you guys were always war ready?
Well, you had to show up on these alerts with a B4 bag with certain basic stuff to,
Okay.
toothbrush and
Right.
shaver
Okay.
and
Okay.
all that sort of thing. So every time you showed up, you had to have that with you. After a while, realized that it was kind of a waste of time to have all that in there. So unfortunately, I removed a lot of stuff. So when the time actually came, I didn't have all the stuff I needed, but it didn't matter. Off we went. And we got to Saigon, so this is August of 1964, when the official beginning of the Vietnam War. I mean, there had been, quote, advisors, and a lot of people had been to Vietnam prior to that date, but that was when the Gulf of Tonkin incident and the Gulf of Tonkin resolution was signed, and was the, quote, official beginning of the Vietnam War. But so anyway, we went to Saigon, and at the time, it was a beautiful city, and we were one of the earlier guys in, and we stayed at the Continental Palace Hotel, which was the nicest hotel in Saigon, because there weren't many others there, and then we were allowed to join this, or for free, this exclusive French athletic club there that had tennis courts and swimming pool, and they even had water skiing, which we did for a short while till they started machine gunning guys water skiing. But anyway, it was, really kind of neat. Fast forwarding to the end of the war, and I spent about 10 years, and I'll tell you later, but my last flight, and so from then on, every other time that I would fly in there, as time went on, we would get relegated to a lower class hotel, because then the generals and colonels and a lot of other people were in, and my last flight out of there was just before the fall of Saigon, and I slept in a tent on the side of the runway. So I went from the finest to essentially none.
What rank were you
Let's see.
when you were at the finest hotel?
Well, I was just I was a second lieutenant, I think. Yeah.
And then sleeping on the tent, were you still
Yeah, I was probably a major or something by then.
Wow.
But anyway, it was an interesting time. I got to see it through for a lot of years there.
Okay, so what was the total amount of time that you were over there?
Well, so I was in Yokota until, well, let's see, maybe I should back up. So we went to Saigon, and then about a month later, I was gone from about 3 or 4 months when we first left from my wife, who's waiting in the, but then we went to Tok Lee, Thailand. And what most people don't know is that most of the air war conducted by the Air Force was out of Thailand, not Vietnam. And so at the time, Tok Lee, Thailand was just a strip of concrete in the jungle, and we slept in tents along the side of the runway. And so it was very primitive. It later became a major base. And but so anyway, in October, so we said that we went down there in August, September, October, so like 2 months later, we were going to fly a mission into Laos in the Plain of Jars and refuel fighters who were bombing in the Plain of Jars. And before we would take off, you had to send a jeep down the runway, because the animals would, water buffalo and boa constrictors and cobras and so forth, would sleep on the runway at night. And so there wasn't there were a few fences around, but I mean, it didn't keep them out, so we had to literally go down the runway and chase all these animals out before we took off. So anyway, on October 14th, we took off at about, probably 4:35 and 5 o'clock in the morning, so it was still dark, to go to the Plain of Jars in Laos. And we got up there, and all of a sudden we started having engine fires, and we didn't know exactly what caused them. Whether we didn't see any anti-aircraft or anything, and so we weren't sure what the reason was, but we had multiple engine fires, and I had a friend who had bailed out sometime before that, and when he bailed, they had multiple engine fires, and when he bailed out, the wing broke off. Just as he bailed out, plane went into a spin and killed everybody but him. And so he said, if you get in that situation, I suggest you, you get out of there. And so here we were, so we decided to try to make it back to the base in Thailand, but the fires started burning, and we decided it was time to bail out. So we got a Mayday call out to the base, telling them that we're going to bail out. And so we did bail out, and at that time we didn't carry radios in our parachutes. And after that time they started, this is the very beginning of the war. After that time they carried radios. Sometimes guys would carry 2 or 3 radios just to make sure your battery doesn't run out or something. But so there were a crew of 6, and none of us saw anyone else because it was at night in the jungle, and we were probably like a mile apart. And so I landed in a nice plowed field, and like I say, it was still kind of dark, but it was just starting to get a little bit daylight. And I walked into this clearing, and these guys jumped out with spears and blowguns and machetes, and I had a .38 pistol. They didn't have guns. They were wearing loincloths, and they lived in grass huts, so that, it was very, very primitive. And but there was enough of them with the spears and stuff so then I pulled out whatever I had in my pockets, pencils, pens, chewing gum, candy bars, money, whatever I had, and started handing them out. Pretty soon the children came out, and the whole village was gathered around me, and I was just trying to be,
Nice.
Mr. Nice Guy.
Mhm.
And then we had what we called a blood chit that was written in various languages that said, "I'm an American, and if you help me, you'll be rewarded." And they didn't, and I had the chief there, and I'm kind of, trying to get him to read this stuff, but I could tell he'd never been to school a day in his life, and he didn't know how to read. But, had I been able to convey that, they would have gotten, $10,000 or something. I mean, it would have made them rich for the rest of their lives, but I couldn't convey that to them. And so anyway, I was probably on the ground a couple of hours, and then all of a sudden it just started to get daylight, and I heard this chopper, and he saw me, and he just dropped down a little field right next to him, and all these people were around me, and I just took off running as fast as I could, dove into the side of that chopper, and I don't know if they were throwing spears at me or what, but I didn't stop to look back. And so I just jumped in a helicopter, and off we went. And then we went along along the flight path that we were going on, and we picked up each guy one at a time. And one guy was hanging in a tree, another guy was in a swamp, and one guy broke his leg, and so we had you know, all different kinds of things. So we got back to the base in the morning, and guys were pouring champagne over their heads and stuff, and so that was that. And then the next day we got in a canoe, and we went up to the area the plane had been in on autopilot in a slow dive, and the plane crashed into a village and killed 17 people. The odds of that crashing into a village in that sparsely populated area were, you know, almost non-existent. But it happened, and the plane had a full load of fuel on board, 180,000 pounds of fuel, and when it exploded, it was just like napalm, and they were just like little, you know, quarter-sized pieces of molten aluminum when it hit, and so it wiped out everybody in the village. And so anyway, we went up and saw that, a very sad thing, because we had no idea where it landed until we took this canoe up there. Then fast forwarding a little bit, last year, so 2018, my son called me and said that he was and his fiancée were going to Japan and Thailand. Would I like to go? And I said, yeah, I'd very much like to go. And I said, but I would like to visit, try to find the village where I'd bailed out. So we rented a taxi cab for $80 a day and went up to the area that I had marked. And the cab driver spoke a little English, and so he started asking. I told him the story, and he started asking around, and they said, well, there's one lady would be the only one old enough to know this story, and she lives in a sugarcane, owns a sugarcane field. And so we jumped in a taxi, and the sugarcane's beaten against the taxi and everything. We finally made it to her place, and sure enough, she came out, and he explained what had happened, and she said, yes, I remember. And so she was 12 years old at the time, and but she remembered it vividly, and so we got talking and everything, and so we wound up taking, she and the cab driver and my son and I, we went to lunch, and we sat there for 2 hours eating and drinking. The total bill was $25. So anyway, it was kind of fun to go back and see that. So so let's see, where were we going back? So then the inspectors came in to check out our airplanes, and they were too old, really, to do the mission that we were doing. And the KC-135 was the later jet version of a tanker, and that was the main tankers at the time. And so they just said, that's it, let's just get rid of these old airplanes. So they said, we're going to clear you for a one-time flight to take one airplane back to Davis-Monthan and Tucson, Arizona, where the boneyard is. And so here we are. They said, so that's your last mission. Just do that, and your squadron's going to fold and go on to something else. And so anyway, we took off on a different airplane, obviously, out of Saigon. And on climb out, we got a fire warning light. And, you know, we're all kind of like, wait a minute, this is our first flight. So anyway, we shut the engine down and we got level off, and then I smelled smoke in the cockpit, and some of the nav equipment was on fire, so we had a CO2 to the fire. Fire in a cockpit is a very dangerous, thing. But anyway, we got the fire out, and we landed in Clark in the Philippines, and went in and said, we got all these problems, and they said, well, we're not fixing anything. You guys got to fly that thing to Arizona and the boneyard, and so just get it there. And one of the things that burned up was the autopilot, so we had to hand fly it from the Philippines into Tucson, Arizona, and but it was pretty cool. We taxied past B-29s and B-24s and parked our airplane there. So then I went from there to C-130. You probably know what that is. You probably flew in something, did you?
I have.
Okay, so I went to C-130s out of Okinawa, and the day we went, my wife and I got on a C-130 and flew from Japan to Okinawa, and we had just gotten up to the place where we were going to stay, and I got a phone call that said there's a typhoon coming in. We need to move the airplanes, so you got to leave your wife there, and then we'll fly them out of Okinawa. So I took off and left her there, and 2 feet of water were running through our living room. So on our very first day there. But so anyway, then I transitioned into the C-130 at Naha, Okinawa, and our main mission then became forward air control in North Vietnam and along the Ho Chi Minh trails.
What year is it?
What year?
Mm-hmm.
So that was 64, well, 65. It was, our squadron broke up right at the end of 64, and so we went straight to Okinawa, and so that was the first part of 65 through, then I stayed through 1967. So for about 2.5 years, I flew primarily forward air control along the Ho Chi Minh trails at night, and our job was to fly over the targets at 3,000 or 4,000 feet, and then when the fighters came through, we'd be up there for like 8 hours, and the fighters would come through whenever they came through, every half an hour or something, and ask us what we were working on, and then we would tell them, and then we would drop flares on parachutes that would light up the target area like daylight. And so we'd say, hey, okay, now you see the river and you see the road, yeah, and they'd come screaming in and bomb and strafe, and I'd say, no, you dummy, I said on the other side of the river. And they go, oh yeah, sorry dude. Anyway, but so then we spend the whole night up there, and they would come through, call us, and we'd tell them what to do.
How old were you?
Well, let's see, I was probably 23 or something like that, 23, 20.
You were probably one of the older gentlemen there.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And then one night there was a famous colonel who was commander of the fighter squadron in Ubon at the time, where we were flying out of, and named Robin Olds, and wore a big handlebar mustache, and was really a heck of a guy. And anyway, they were having one night they were having a squadron party, and so the bar was right next to the dining hall deal, and they had a big sign that said "Closed for private party," and so anyway, I had been flying all night long, and I walked into the bar. I just wanted to get a beer, take it over, and have breakfast, and so these guys have been drinking all night long and playing poker, and so this guy says, "Hey, what are you doing here?" I said, "Well, I've been flying all night. I just want to get a beer and go." And he says, "Well, couldn't you read the sign?" And I said, "Yeah, I'm just getting a beer and I'm just going in there." And so they said, "Hey, we got a wise guy here." And of course, they've been drinking all night long. And they went to grab my, in your crotch area, you had a pocket shaped like this that had your survival knife in it, and it had a hook knife part on it, so that if you got hung up in a tree when you parachuted out, you could cut the shroud lines. And so a fun thing that they liked to do was to tear that off and then hang it up on, there was a hook up there in the bar. And so that was kind of just a little fun thing they liked to do. Well, I just wasn't in the mood because I've been tired flying all night long. Just wanted to get a beer. Anyway, so the guy came to reach for it, and so I decked him, and it, right on, just like in the cowboy movies, they were playing poker, and he fell on the poker table. Chips are flying and everything, and then they all got up, and they took off every stitch of clothes I had on, including my boots. And by this time it was, about 7 in the morning, and people are walking to their jobs and so forth. And they opened the back door and they go 1, 2, 3, and it had been raining and the red mud was out there, and they go 1, 2, 3, sling me bare naked, smack into this red mud out there, and all these people are going by. So anyway, needless to say, the next night I went in there with all my big friends, and they weren't there. But anyway, that was a rather amusing time. But so that's so I flew that for, like I say, till the middle of '67, and then I got out of the Air Force, and I was going to go to the MBA program, and I had been accepted at Berkeley and the University of Washington, and so I figured as long as I was right there at Travis where we came in, I was not in uniform, but my wife and I drove out to Cal Berkeley. And, I had been gone since 1963. And so hippies were invented about 1965. And I had zero idea of what was going on in the United States at that time. People say, "You remember that song," or "You remember the football player," or something. And I said, "No, I don't," because I have a 4-year blank where the only thing we had, obviously no internet or anything, so was the Stars and Stripes I'd see once in a while, but that was, military propaganda. And so I had no idea what was going on in the United States. And so I drove to Berkeley and right up to the administration building, and I started to walk up the steps, and it was in the summertime, and there were these long-haired guys. I'd never seen a long-haired guy before, and long-haired women laying on the grass smoking something that I had no idea what they were smoking. I mean, this was before, I never saw any drugs in Vietnam, right? And I don't think in my time frame there were. Later on there were, but at the time, and so I had no idea what they were smoking. And they had big signs, anti-military, anti-Vietnam, all these big signs there, and I wonder what in the hell is going on. And I just stood there for like a total culture shock. I just stood there for several minutes trying to take it in. And I said, I don't know what this is, but I'm going to go back home to good old Seattle. And I went straight up there, went up to the administration building, exact same thing. So it was no different than, of course, Cal Berkeley. It was kind of at the crossroads of where all that happened. And so then I started the MBA program, and the reserves called, and they were kind of looking for guys, and I figured I'll pick up a couple bucks on the weekends. In North Korea happened. Yeah, do you even know what that is?
I do not.
What happened is that the North Koreans attacked an American spy ship, supposedly in their waters, although we claimed it was international waters, and commandeered the ship. The commander was supposed to scuttle the ship, but they got on him too fast and he couldn't do it. So they came on the ship and then took the ship in to North Korea. It sits there to this day. And it's for whatever tourists, there aren't many, but the tourists that come through, they say this is the American ship that we took over. And there were, I think, a crew of almost 100. They put them in prison for a year. And so they recalled the reserves. So I had just joined this outfit and went to one meeting, and I got recalled. Turned out to be 2 more years, mainly to get airlift to Vietnam. It was kind of like an excuse almost. And so I spent the next 2 years on active duty. And then after that was over, I went to work for IBM, but I stayed in the reserves, and I retired after 22 years later on. But so I was still flying back to Vietnam, and so from 1964 to 1973, I was in the combat zone almost every month. I'm sure I missed a few in there, but so I essentially got 10 years of combat pay. So most of it was reserve time like that, just flying in and out of there. But anyway, and that's when I went from the finest hotel to sleeping on the tent.
How'd your wife feel about all this,
Well,
going back and forth and...
Well, she was very good. She was a great wife and a great mother. I had 3 children, and my first son was born in Okinawa, and my next son was born in Seattle, Washington. But at the time that he was being born, I was back in Vietnam, and they called me and said, he's being born, so I got a flight and came back. But then I had a daughter later. So anyway, but she was great. I mean, really,
Most daughters
really
are.
Huh? Yeah,
Most daughters are
yeah.
pretty.
So
How do you feel that your wartime experiences have affected your life?
It hasn't. It has not affected me negatively. Now, for the most part, when you're flying, you get shot at, and when I was flying at forward air control, we got shot at almost every night, and we'd come a lot of times land with. Some nights we could see tracers coming up, but there were other nights when we'd land and they say, boy, you really got shot up tonight. And we said, really? I didn't even know that. Because I think a lot of it was small arms fire, because we were, flying at 2,000 to 4,000 feet. So we could have taken, we obviously took small arms fire. But there were anti-aircraft guns as well. Usually they had tracers and we could see them. But, for the most part, I didn't, if either you got shot down or you didn't, and so if you didn't, I mean, it's not like maybe you in the Army where you're down there and, you see guys with their body parts blown off and all that kind of thing. One time we did fly into the Central Highlands. We were flying over, and they said there's the Army was in a serious battle, and they needed to medical evac right away, and so we dropped down, and as we taxied, there were mortars going off, and we didn't even stop taxiing. We're just slowly taxiing and opened up the back, and they were throwing guys in the back who had serious wounds and so forth. And we, blasted out of there and took a bunch of guys over to Da Nang, I think. And so, but that was as close as I got to, people in terrible situations and so forth. So in the Air Force, it's kind of different. I mean, like I said, you're either, fly your mission, you may get shot at, but you're down drinking a cold beer afterwards. And whereas in the Army, you're lurking through the jungle, and it was that. I don't know how that would have affected me, but from what I did, it really didn't seem to affect me. And I saw the Ken Burns series on Vietnam, and I think he does a good job. I've seen a lot of his works before, but when I thought the history that he told about Dien Bien Phu and all that sort of thing was very accurate and very good. But when it came to showing the average troop in Vietnam, it came off to me as it was totally negative. I mean, everyone hated to be there. The morale was terrible. People in the United States were protesting, and anyway, it to me it portrayed a very negative attitude toward of the people that were in the war, and I never saw any of that. And I know Oliver North said, I don't know what Vietnam he was trying to portray, but it was not the Vietnam that I knew. I mean, the people that I knew were professionals. We were trained to do our job. We were, we did our job in a professional manner. We thought we were doing the right thing in stopping communism, and our attitudes were very, very good. So that's the thing that I would disagree with Ken Burns on it. But as far as affecting me personally, obviously I went through a lot of things, and I think it's all part of my life and experiences, and in later life people said, well, gee, you've gone through some bad things or whatever, and how do you do it? And I said, well, I was shot down, I was shot at for a long period of time, and I've had survived two heart bypass surgeries. So I said, not a heck of a lot bothers me. So, anyway,
Okay. So you've remained in contact with quite a few of your veteran compadres, and you're here now with one of your units. What unit is that?
it's called the TAC Tanker Association.
Okay.
And so it's guys that flew tankers. And,
Is that a general, like, league or legion, or?
well, no, it's just it's a small group of the people that flew the KB-50. So
Okay.
didn't include the KC-135s and all that. Just all the KB. And our squadron motto was "We pass gas." So
Well, thank you for that.
yeah, yeah.
You helped a lot of people with that gas, I'm
Yeah,
sure.
That's right.
Are you affiliated with any other veterans organizations?
I'm not. That's this is the only one. I just found out about this one a few years back and have gone to a couple of them. But good fun bunch of guys.
Okay.
But I meet every morning, just about in Bellevue, Washington. There's a group of about a dozen guys, and you just show up or you don't show up. But Monday through Friday, and they're almost all veterans. And we just have a lot of laughs, and you learn something new every day too. It's a lot of fun though.
That's always just, it's really nice to have that feeling of
Camaraderie.
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's really amazing because you know that person has been through something that you've been through,
Yep.
and it's just it's something that you can't really explain, but you know it.
Yep.
And you don't have to explain it because they know it.
Yeah.
So,
No,
you know, you
it's
walk
great.
into a room and we're really fantastic. Has your military service impacted your feelings on war, like now, or about the military in general?
Well, I think, I mean, obviously I'm a patriot and proud of it and happy to have served. I do think that in all wars, our leaders let us down to a certain extent. I mean, the main thing was rules of engagement, and they still, after Vietnam, the thoughts were that we've learned our lesson in Vietnam, that you don't want to go get involved in conflicts, and if you do, you don't want to have restrictions placed on you or what you can and can't do. But nowadays with communications the way they are and everything, and the drones and it's I remember when they're trying to take out bin Laden, I think Clinton, they had bin Laden in their sights like 3 or 4 times, and Clinton said no. And I don't know if it was collateral damage possibility or what, but he didn't do it, and Obama did say yes. But to put restrictions in Vietnam, I mean, I had circles on my charts in these villages where you were not allowed to bomb, and obviously that's where they placed their anti-aircraft, right in there, and you can't, nee.
Mm-hmm.
I can shoot you, but you can't shoot me. And to me, that's just wrong. I mean, I think you shouldn't go to war unless you have to. But when you do, you better.
Let them do what they need to do.
Yeah, that's right. So, anyway.
Okay. Do you feel like there's anything that we haven't discussed or that should be added to this interview?
No, I think that pretty much tells the story.
That's an accurate display of who you are, your career, and what you've done since then. So did you retire from IBM?
No, I was there for 7 years, and then I went to
Google. No.
No, Google wasn't around then, but then I went into the venture capital business in Seattle. And then I retired. Well, my wife became very ill, so I had to take care of her for almost 3 years before she passed away.
Okay.
And so I had never intended to retire, but I had to because of that. But IBM was a really great company to work for. Enjoyed that very much.
Finally use that engineering.
Yeah, finally.
Finally.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. What message would you like to leave for future generations that will hear or see this interview?
Well, I don't know if anybody wants to hear it, but no, I would. I mean, from my experience, you just heard, and I would encourage people who have I mean, I asked my kids if they had any interest in the military, and they all said no. But there are a lot of young people that hear the calling and want to participate, and all I can say is that mine was a very rewarding experience, and I'm very proud and happy that I had the opportunity.
Me too.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, thank you so much. That concludes our interview with Gary Craig. Thank you so much for your time today and for your military service.
Thank you for yours.
You're very welcome.
Okay.